Tonight, something extraordinary and dangerously clarifying has just unfolded. The White House didn't just disagree with London over a crucial tech pact. It didn't send a stern letter or quietly delay negotiations. It performed a surgical strike on the very foundation of the modern special relationship, freezing the primary mechanism of future cooperation and sending a message so sharp, so brutally clear, that it instantly reshaped the political reality for Prime Minister Keir Starmer. This isn't posturing. This isn't bureaucratic friction. This is the raw force of political will applied directly against an ally, triggered by deep, unresolved suspicions over data, sovereignty, and the specter of China. It is the closest we have come in months to seeing the transatlantic alliance crack not under external pressure, but under the unbearable weight of internal disagreement. And it all started with one official document, delivered late Monday evening, a chillingly formal note verbale sent straight to the UK Embassy on Massachusetts Avenue, Washington, D.C. That note contained a unilateral, unflinching declaration. The ratification process for the Transatlantic Digital Trust and Supply Chain Accord, the TDTSCA, was over. Frozen. Dead in the water. This was not merely a technical disagreement over trade tariffs. This accord was slated to be the diplomatic centerpiece of the next decade, harmonizing standards for artificial intelligence, regulating the flow of commercial data, and ensuring supply chain integrity between the two largest economies that claim to share intelligence, values, and strategy. But the White House has now declared that shared strategy defunct, citing Britain's national exceptionalism as the unacceptable risk. We are witnessing a moment when the economic leverage of Washington is being weaponized against its closest partner, and the resulting tremors are already shaking market confidence and political trust across the globe. This script begins with the precise mechanics of the diplomatic detonation. The note verbale, delivered on Monday, formalized the rupture. It was confirmation that the political distance between London and Washington had become too wide to bridge with pleasantries and historical nods. And behind that formal communication was an administration official, speaking on deep background, delivering the true core message. A message that cuts to the heart of British sovereignty claims. The UK's refusal to allow external review of their new AI safety standards creates unacceptable risk, the official stated, unflinching in their assessment. We will not subordinate American data security to a policy of national exceptionalism. Think about the sheer political weight of that statement. It is a fundamental rejection of Britain's right to structure its own digital regulatory environment without explicit US oversight. It transforms the discussion from technical standards into a zero-sum contest of power. Either London bends on its core assertion of digital autonomy, or Washington ensures that autonomy comes at a crippling economic cost. And this move lands directly on the desk of Prime Minister Keir Starmer, just weeks before his highly anticipated, and now potentially disastrous, state visit. That visit was supposed to seal the deal, to confirm his political transition from domestic focus to global statesman, to revive the fabled special relationship. Instead, the White House has issued a preemptive declaration of war on his diplomatic credibility. The underlying conflict is not complex, but its implications are vast. It comes down to two words, the China link. The Transatlantic Digital Trust and Supply Chain Accord was designed to build a firewall against systemic adversaries. Yet London, under Starmer's new administration, has been pursuing a nuanced, economically pragmatic, and, to Washington's eye, dangerously naive relationship with Beijing's tech sector. The primary trigger for the White House freeze is Britain's newly unveiled National Cyber Resilience Strategy. This strategy does the unthinkable. It designates specific, though currently unnamed, Chinese technology firms as low-risk partners for non-critical infrastructure development. This is not about Huawei controlling the core 5G network anymore. This is about allowing targeted Chinese entities into the periphery, into the supply chains, into the data processing centers, where they can interact with the very infrastructure intended to be covered by the TDTSCA. The U.S. objection is laser-focused on one single paragraph within the sprawling accord. Clause 4 of the TDTSCA Annex. Washington argues this clause fails dramatically to provide adequate assurance that UK-processed U.S. commercial data belonging to American citizens, American corporations, and American defense contractors, will be genuinely firewall protected from these designated, low-risk Chinese partners. The United States sees a loophole large enough to drive a state-sponsored espionage campaign through. They see the UK betting on a regulatory tightrope walk, balancing access to crucial US investment and data against the perceived need to maintain open, stable, and less confrontational trade ties with Beijing. The White House has now delivered its verdict. That bet is too expensive. The risk calculus is fatally flawed. We are watching a crisis of trust materialize in real time. Washington believes, at the highest levels of the National Security Council, that London's definition of non-critical is dangerously malleable and subject to political or economic pressure from Beijing. When you share intelligence, when you share military targeting data, when you share the proprietary secrets that fuel the global digital economy, the definitions of trust must be absolute. The moment that trust is rendered conditional, the alliance itself is conditional. This is why the language used by the administration official, the rejection of national exceptionalism, is so potent. It means your need to be masters of your own destiny, your desire to chart an independent course that differs from the post-Ukraine, post-pandemic, US-led consensus on China containment, is now a threat to us, and we will treat it as such. But the White House's action is not just a diplomatic memo. It is an economic earthquake with an immediate Richter scale reading. The consequences of this political rupture were not delayed. They were instantaneous. Within 4 hours of the official note verbale being delivered, before most of London's financial district was even awake to the news, the shares of the two largest UK-based digital infrastructure providers, companies focused primarily on transatlantic hosting and data management, dropped an average of 7.9%. This is market certainty evaporating in a single moment of political hostility. These are not small, volatile startups. These are the backbone corporations of the UK's post-Brexit global digital ambition. Their value is tied intrinsically to the seamless, trusted flow of data and investment across the Atlantic. When the TDTSCA was frozen, the market instantly priced in the new reality: uncertainty, regulatory divergence, and the chilling specter of future economic retaliation. But the economic shockwave goes deeper than stock prices. It hits the ground in the real economy, in investment decisions that determine where factories are built, where jobs are created, and where the next generation of technological innovation will be sited. Consider the $1.8 billion US investment by Intel into the new semiconductor hub in Newport, Wales. That investment was not just corporate maneuvering. It was hailed as a geopolitical victory for London, a symbol of Washington's commitment to securing Western supply chains through UK partnership. Tonight, that $1.8 billion investment has been designated under review indefinitely by the investors. This is the ultimate lever of American power being ruthlessly deployed. It's not just a veto on a treaty, it's a freeze on a future. The message from Intel's investors, and by extension from Washington, is clear. We will not commit billions of dollars to build the foundational architecture of the future economy in a nation whose data security policies we cannot trust. We will not fund the infrastructure that might, under London's current definition of low risk, be compromised by actors tied to Beijing. The economic collateral damage here is precise, immediate, and politically debilitating for Keir Starmer. He cannot afford to lose that investment, and he certainly cannot afford to appear weak or indecisive in the face of such aggressive economic coercion from his supposed closest ally. And that brings us to the political showdown that unfolded across the Atlantic. At 6 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time, Prime Minister Starmer convened an emergency COBRA session at 10 Downing Street. COBRA, the UK's crisis management structure, is reserved for acts of terrorism, national disasters, or, in this case, a fundamental diplomatic crisis that threatens national economic security. The very convening of COBRA elevates this dispute from a policy spat to a declared national emergency. Starmer's response, delivered via an official spokesman, was predictably defiant, yet deeply dangerous. He confirmed that he will not alter the new national security bill, the legislation that incorporates the contentious definition of low-risk Chinese partners, to appease Washington. His quote defines the high-stakes position he has taken. The Prime Minister maintains that the UK must be master of its own data architecture. The special relationship is built on mutual respect, not unilateral economic coercion. This is Starmer digging in, staking his political leadership on the principle of absolute sovereignty in the digital age. He is consciously echoing historical moments of Anglo-American tension, moments where a British Prime Minister stood up to U.S. demands, asserting the right of the UK to determine its own geopolitical alignment, independent of the dominant U.S. consensus. But this stance comes with enormous risk. In the 21st century, sovereignty is inextricably linked to supply chain access and economic connectivity. By insisting on absolute control over its data architecture, while simultaneously maintaining economic ties that the U.S. deems too risky, London is effectively choosing a path of economic isolation, or at least economic divergence, from its largest security and trade partner. Starmer has placed himself between two immovable objects: the urgent necessity of U.S. investment and the ideological commitment to national independence regarding China policy. If he capitulates, he appears weak, confirming the perception that the UK is merely an economic vassal state. If he holds firm, he risks plunging the UK into a deeper economic crisis and permanently rupturing the security coordination that defines the alliance. And the immediate diplomatic fallout confirms that this is not a skirmish. It is a full-blown rift. The most telling sign of the crisis came not from a hostile press conference, but from a dramatic alteration of a senior official's travel plans. Chancellor of the Exchequer Rachel Reeves was scheduled to fly to New York for critical investor meetings on December 17th. Those meetings were intended to stabilize market confidence, showcase UK resilience, and critically, court the very financial institutions now questioning their digital infrastructure investments. Reeves has cancelled the trip entirely. She remains in London to manage the domestic fallout of the White House freeze. The cancellation is a powerful symbolic admission that the crisis is too severe to be delegated or handled remotely. The Chancellor is needed at the heart of government to coordinate the economic counter-strategy, to reassure domestic markets, and to prepare for the inevitable hostile reaction from those impacted by the Intel freeze and the falling tech stocks. But the most potent diplomatic maneuver, the move that speaks volumes about the severity of the rift, is the recall of the UK ambassador to the US, Dame Karen Pierce. Ambassador Pierce has been recalled to London for urgent high-level consultations. This is not routine. Ambassadors are the direct conduit of communication between capitals. Recalling the ambassador is an act of diplomatic exasperation, a public signal that the channel of negotiation has broken down, and that the crisis demands in-person intervention at the highest political level. It signals a move away from quiet diplomacy toward a more confrontational, high-stakes political resolution. When an ambassador is recalled, it means that the host nation, in this case the US, has taken an action so unacceptable that the sending nation must temporarily withdraw its highest representative to reassess the entire relationship framework. The diplomatic machinery is now sputtering. The core question now facing both Washington and London is this: what becomes of the special relationship when economic leverage replaces mutual respect? For decades, the alliance functioned on the assumption that despite differences in tactical approach, the US and the UK shared fundamental strategic interests, especially regarding the rise of major geopolitical competitors. The TDTSCA was intended to formalize that shared strategy in the digital age. Its death signals a profound fracture in that consensus. London views its China strategy, the designation of low-risk partners and the commitment to national data architecture, as a sophisticated effort to balance trade realities with security imperatives. They believe an outright technological decoupling is impossible and economically suicidal. Washington views this strategy as strategically reckless, driven by domestic economic desperation rather than clear-eyed security analysis. They believe that any opening to Chinese tech entities, no matter how small or non-critical, is an unacceptable vulnerability in a zero-sum competition for global technological dominance. The White House freeze is thus more than a policy dispute. It is a declaration that the US will no longer tolerate the UK charting an independent, nuanced path in this new Cold War. It is the end of the post-Brexit fantasy of global Britain, maintaining equidistant relationships with economic partners while relying solely on US security guarantees. Keir Starmer's government is now facing a severe credibility crisis. His state visit to Washington, intended as a triumphant moment of alliance renewal, is now shaping up to be a confrontation, a demand for capitulation delivered on American soil. If Starmer arrives in Washington without reversing course on Clause 4, he will face an administration that views him as a diplomatic liability. If he caves before the visit, he returns home politically wounded, having confirmed that U.S. economic coercion dictates UK national security policy. The implications for the wider transatlantic architecture are equally severe. If the U.S. can use economic sanctions and investment freezes to dictate the domestic digital policy of its closest NATO ally, what message does that send to other allies struggling with the same China calculus? Nations like Germany, France, or Japan, who also seek to balance trade with security. The White House has just established a terrifying precedent. Compliance with the U.S. technology consensus is now a prerequisite for economic stability and diplomatic trust. The alliance is hardening, demanding conformity, and punishing deviation with swift economic force. This is a moment when geopolitics becomes something more than maps, more than strategy, more than quiet intelligence briefings behind closed doors. This is a moment when words begin to harden into posture, when posture leans dangerously toward escalation, and when escalation threatens to become something neither Washington nor London can control once it starts to reshape the markets and the political landscape of a seemingly unbreakable alliance. The relationship built over generations, forged in wartime and sustained by shared intelligence, is now being tested by the raw force of techno-nationalism. The transatlantic digital trust and supply chain accord may be frozen, but the crisis it has unleashed is just beginning to melt the ice of diplomatic civility. We are entering a new, much colder phase of the special relationship, a phase defined not by shared values, but by the cold, hard currency of data sovereignty and economic compliance. And the world is watching closely to see which nation blinks first.